Security cameras are supposed to be a deterrent, a silent guardian. But what happens when they just become the only witness to a horror you can't escape tonight? We're exploring 3 terrifying encounters, all captured by the unblinking eyes of security cameras in the dead of night. From a trespasser who had every move mapped out to a ghostly figure taking shape in the static. These stories prove that sometimes the real threat is the one you never see coming. Story 1, The Watcher. The night shift in a downtown high-rise has its own kind of silence. It's not peaceful like a library. It's a deep, pressurized quiet that makes every little noise feel 10 times louder. For Mark, a security guard with 3 years on the job, this silence was his office. His whole world was a small, climate-controlled room, lit only by the soft, blue-white glow of 24 monitors. Each screen was a window into a sleeping part of the building, empty hallways, deserted lobbies, and silent parking garages. The job was 99% boredom, just watching nothing happen. The first couple of hours of his shift were totally normal. He did his first patrol, checked the door logs, and settled in with a lukewarm coffee, his eyes scanning the grid of screens in a familiar, almost subconscious rhythm. It was around 1 a.m. when the first alert pinged. Motion detected. Stairwell C, 4th floor. Mark leaned in, focusing on the monitor. The stairwell was a poorly lit concrete tube, and he saw nothing. He rewound the feed, watching it back. Still nothing, just a glitch. He figured. The motion sensors were so sensitive that a draft or even a piece of falling dust could set them off. He made a quick note in the log and went back to his scan. 20 minutes later, another ping. This time, 7th floor service corridor. Again, the live feed showed a completely empty hallway. He rewound. The timestamp on the alert lined up with a flicker in the overhead lights, but he couldn't see any movement. It was strange, but not exactly alarming. Old buildings have their quirks. They groan and shudder as they settle in the cool night air. Still, a little seed of unease started to grow. 2 false alerts in less than half an hour was weird. He decided to do a spot check, pulling up the archive footage from the past week for just those 2 cameras. He fast-forwarded through hours of emptiness, and then he stopped. The night before, around the same time, another alert in stairwell C, and another on the 7th floor corridor. He checked the night before that, and the night before that. It was a pattern. Every single night for the last 5 nights, between 1 and 2. These 2 seemingly random cameras were being triggered. A cold feeling, colder than the room's aggressive AC, prickled the back of his neck. This wasn't a glitch. Glitches are random. This was methodical. The vibe in his little control room shifted. The building didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was being watched. Mark was a by-the-book guy. He called his supervisor, who sounded skeptical, but told him to call the local police for a non-emergency walkthrough, just in case. As he waited, Mark's eyes were glued to the monitors. His sense of calm was gone. He felt like a player in a game he didn't even know he was playing. When the 2 officers showed up, they were professional, but looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Trespassers in buildings like this were almost always just homeless people looking for a warm place to sleep. They started their sweep, with Mark guiding them over the radio. They cleared the 7th floor, nothing. They moved to stairwell C, starting from the top and working down. Central, this is Unit 1. The radio crackled. We're on the 2nd floor landing of stairwell C. We've got an individual down here. Mark's heart hammered his ribs. Copy that. He managed to get out, his voice tight. Is the individual hostile? There was a pause. Negative. Central. He appears to be asleep. The officers brought the man down to the lobby. He was thin, wrapped in a worn-out jacket, and seemed more confused than anything else. As they questioned him, Mark watched from the control room, that feeling of dread refusing to leave. It all felt too simple. The man was cooperative and admitted he'd been sleeping in the stairwell for a few nights. It was when they emptied his pockets that the real horror of the situation crashed down. Out of his jacket came a wallet, some loose change, and a small, tattered notebook with a set of hand-drawn maps. One of the officers unfolded a map and held it up. It was a floor plan of the building, but it was more than that. There were little X's drawn in different spots. Mark felt his blood run cold when he realized what they were. They were the camera locations, every single one. Another page had patrol routes drawn on it, with timing scribbled in the margins. The man had memorized Mark's schedule, noting the exact minutes he'd be away from his desk and which floors he'd be on. The alerts Mark had seen weren't the man being accidentally caught. They were him testing the system. He was moving into camera blind spots, checking their motion sensitivity and learning all their secrets. He hadn't just been mapping the building, he'd been mapping Mark. This man wasn't just looking for shelter. He was doing reconnaissance. The police took him away, and the incident was officially logged as a simple trespass. But for Mark, it was anything but. He was left alone in the silent tower, surrounded by the very cameras that were supposed to make him feel safe. But now, they felt like windows that looked both ways. He was the watcher, but someone else had been watching him. The silence of the building wasn't peaceful anymore. It was filled with the ghost of a meticulous plan and the terrifying knowledge of how easily a fortress can be broken by someone patient enough to just watch. Story 2. The figure in static. Some places just feel heavy. The old city library, which had been closed down for over a year, was one of those places. For David, the security guard assigned to watch the empty building, that weight was something he could feel in his bones. His job was simple: sit in a makeshift office and make sure no one broke in before the building was demolished. His only company was a bank of 16 grainy, black and white monitors, each showing a different dusty corner of the library. The nights were long and so quiet, broken only by the hum of the equipment and the groans of the building's ancient HVAC system. David passed the time reading and making his hourly patrols through the massive, empty halls. The worst part of the patrol was always the basement archives. It was a maze of empty metal shelves, and the air down there was thick, cold, and smelled like decaying paper and damp concrete. One Tuesday night, or maybe it was early Wednesday morning, David was staring blankly at the monitors when he saw a flicker on screen 12. Camera 12 pointed down the long central aisle of the basement archives. The image hadn't gone black. It was rolling with crackling static, like an old TV losing its signal. It lasted for about 5 seconds and then cleared. The empty aisle returned to normal. David leaned forward, rubbing his eyes. The building's wiring was a mess. It was probably just a power fluctuation. He logged the malfunction and didn't think much more of it. The next night, at almost the exact same time, it happened again. Camera 12 dissolved into a blizzard of static. This time, David watched closer. The static seemed different. It wasn't just random noise through the chaos of black and white pixels. For a split second, he thought he saw a shape. It was tall, and unnaturally thin, standing right in the middle of the aisle. It was like a dark interruption in the snowstorm. Then, just like before, the feed cleared. The aisle was empty. He replayed the footage. There it was again, a 5-second burst of static, and inside it, a fleeting vertical smudge that shouldn't be there. He told himself it was just pareidolia, his brain creating patterns out of nothing, because he was bored and alone in a creepy old building. But the image, vague as it was, stuck with him. For the rest of the week, it became a twisted ritual. Every night, around 2:15 a.m., David would fix his eyes on monitor 12 and wait, and every night, it delivered. The feed would corrupt, and through the electronic snow, the shape would appear. Each time, it seemed a little different, a little more defined. What was once a smudge now had the faint suggestion of a head and limbs. And it was closer, not by much, but it was definitely nearer to the camera than it was the night before. David was now genuinely freaked out. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe the failing camera was creating a burn-in on the sensor, an image that only showed up during the signal loss. It was a technical problem. It had to be. He was a logical guy. Ghosts were for the novels he read, not for security monitors. On the second Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the first incident, David was a nervous wreck. He hadn't been sleeping. The image of the static-shrouded figure burned into his mind. He almost didn't want to look at the screen, but he couldn't stop himself. At 2:14, he was staring at monitor 12, his coffee forgotten next to him. The feed began to roll. The static crashed over the image, thick and violent. And there it was, the figure. It was no longer a smudge. It was unmistakably human-shaped, but its proportions were all wrong. Its arms and legs were too long. Its torso too narrow. It was hunched over. And this time, it was clear enough for David to see it was turned towards the camera. He couldn't see a face, just a dark, smooth oval where one should be. It was halfway down the aisle now, so much closer. As he stared, paralyzed, the figure did something impossible. It moved. It didn't walk. It glitched forward, covering several feet in a single, jarring frame skip, like it was a part of the digital corruption itself. David shot back from the desk, a choked gasp escaping his throat. The static cleared. The aisle was empty. The silence in the control room was deafening. He replayed the footage, his mind screaming for an explanation that wasn't there. The playback confirmed it. The glitching, forward lurch, the impossible speed. He stared at the empty aisle on the monitor and thought about his hourly patrol. He was due to walk through that basement in less than 30 minutes. He was supposed to walk right down that aisle to the exact spot where that thing had just been standing. With a trembling hand, David reached for the control panel. He found the input for camera 12, and, without a second thought, he switched it off. The screen went black. A simple, empty, peaceful black. He didn't log it. He didn't call his supervisor. He just sat there, staring at the blank monitor for the rest of his shift. He didn't do his patrol that night. He quit the next morning. He didn't give a reason, just said the job wasn't for him. He never wanted to know what would have happened the next night or the night after. He didn't want to know how close the figure would have gotten. Some things are better left in the dark, lost in the noise and the static. Story 3. The voice on the feed. The north wing of the old St. Jude's Medical Campus had been abandoned for decades. For Sarah a night shift security guard. It was just a dead zone on her monitor bank. Her job was to watch the active parts of the hospital, but the system still had a dozen cameras in the derelict wing. The feeds were silent, grainy, and almost always showed the same thing: empty, dust-filled wards and shadowy hallways. The cameras there didn't even have motion detection. They just recorded a silent 24-hour loop onto a server that was wiped every week. It was a slow, rainy Thursday night when the silence was broken. Sarah was making notes when she heard a faint, scratching sound from her desktop speakers. She paused. It sounded like whispering, but it was too distorted to make out any words, like a radio tuned between stations. She checked the audio feeds. The only cameras on the whole campus with active mics were, bizarrely, in the north wing. The sound was coming from camera 4 in what used to be the third-floor pediatric ward. Sarah leaned in, turning up the volume. The sound was still there, a constant dry whisper. She stared at the monitor for camera 4. It showed a long, dark room lined with the rusted frames of children's beds. Moonlight filtered through a grimy window at the far end, lighting up dust motes floating in the air. Nothing was moving. She figured it was just feedback, maybe electrical interference from the storm. She lowered the volume and went back to her work. An hour later, the sound changed. The static, like whisper, stopped. Then, a new sound came through the speaker. It was a voice, a child's voice, faint and thin, humming a simple, off-key nursery rhyme. Sarah froze. Every muscle in her body went tight. She stared at the monitor for the pediatric ward. It was completely still, empty, yet the humming was undeniable, coming clear as day through the cheap speaker. A cold, suffocating dread settled over her. She quickly scanned the other cameras, all empty. She checked the building access logs. Nobody had entered the north wing in years. The doors were bolted and chained shut from the outside. There was no one in there. There couldn't be. The humming continued for what felt like forever. Sarah wanted to turn it off, to just mute the speakers and pretend it wasn't happening, but she was frozen by a mix of terror and disbelief. Then, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was somehow much, much worse. She held her breath, straining to hear anything.
The watcher
And
on
then the
Sycamore
voice spoke.
Lane, Alex,
Cold.
wasn't a traditional
It whispered.
security guard.
The word
His
was perfectly
post
clear.
was a small,
A child's soft voice
windowless
cutting
room
right
in
through
an
the
office
speaker.
park hundreds
It
of
sounded
miles from the property.
like it was right next
He
to
was
the camera's
paid
microphone.
to protect.
Sarah's
He
blood
was a
turned to
remote
ice.
monitoring operator.
She pushed her chair
a
back
digital
from the
sentinel
desk.
for a wealthy,
This wasn't
gated
feedback.
community
This
called
wasn't her
Sycamore
imagination.
Lane. The walls of his
A
office
voice
were
was
a
speaking
mosaic
from a room
of
that had been
dozens of
sealed for 30
monitors,
years.
each a
She was about to grab the
black
phone
and
to call
white
her
window
supervisor
into an
when the
empty
voice
living
spoke
room
again.
or a moonlit
"Where's my
patio.
blanket?"
The night shift
question was so innocent,
by design,
so normal,
so crushingly
yet
boring.
in this
Alex,
situation,
a college student
it was the
paying
most
off
terrifying
loans,
thing
would
Sarah
watch
had ever
nothing
heard.
happen for
It wasn't
8
just a random
hours.
sound.
Motion alerts
was
were
aware.
almost always
was
a
a
deer
conscious thought.
or a cat.
Her mind
He
raced,
drank stale
trying
coffee,
to find any rational
wrote
explanation.
papers for class,
A squatter,
and felt
a
totally
prank, but how?
disconnected from the silent,
She stared at the monitor,
sleeping lives he
rows
was
of empty,
observing. It was like
rusting
watching
beds.
a dozen silent films with
Her hand
no
trembled
plot.
as she
The
reached for the
system,
mouse,
however,
zooming the
was
camera
a
in
technological
as far
fortress.
as the grainy
Motion
picture would
detection
allow.
was tied to analytics.
She saw nothing but
Audio
dust
could be
and decay.
activated remotely.
As she watched, a single word crackled through the speaker, and it shattered her entire world. Sarah. It was her name. A soft, inquisitive whisper from the darkness. It knew her name. A scream built in her throat, but she choked it down. How? How could it possibly know her name? Her nameplate was on her desk, facing her. The camera was 100 yards away, in a different building. There was no way for it to know her name. The voice was now personal.
A notification
It
popped
wasn't
up.
just a ghost in the machine
Verified
anymore.
human intrusion.
It was a
Alerting
ghost that was aware of
authorities.
her.
The system
was
was
watching
already
her
dialing
just
911.
as she
His
was watching
job
it.
now was to be the
She didn't wait
eyes
for
and
another
ears for the incoming
She
police.
shot up from her
He
chair,
clicked a button,
stumbling backward.
activating the home's
She didn't grab
interior
her coat.
audio feed.
She didn't walk
The
out.
sound of
She
shattering
fled.
glass
She
exploded
ran out of the
in his
security office,
headset.
through
He
the bright,
flinched back
sterile
as he
hallways
watched the
of
two
the main
figures
hospital,
slip into
and didn't
the
stop
kitchen.
until she burst
The
out into the
interior
cold,
camera,
rain-soaked
one-to-be,
parking lot.
picked them up.
She
They
called
were
her
both
supervisor from
holding
her cell phone,
handguns.
her voice a
To
panicked
intruders,
mess,
may,
and quit on the spot.
armed with handguns,
She never went back.
have breached the
She never
kitchen
found out
of 415
if the voice
Sycamore
spoke again.
Lane. Alex
She didn't want
said,
to.
His voice tightened.
All she has
The
was the memory of
911
that
dispatcher
empty,
on the other
moonlit
end
ward
confirmed she had
and
the
the sound
video
of a
feed.
child's voice
He was
whispering her
narrating a
name
home
from a place
invasion.
where no one should be.
Then he heard it.
It taught her
A
the most
woman
terrifying
scream
lesson
from
of
upstairs.
the night shift sometimes.
Raw terror.
The greatest horror isn't seeing something that shouldn't be there, but hearing it, especially when it knows you're listening. And that's all the time we have for tonight. If these stories are the kind of thing you want more of, make sure to subscribe.
His
hit the
hands shook
notification
as
bell.
he switched the feed
It really
to
does
camera
help the
1
channel.
to see,
And
covering
if
the
you have a
living
story
room
of your own
and the bottom
like to
of the
share,
stairs. The
you
scene
can always send it
was
to the
pure
email address
chaos.
on your screen.
Mr. Miller must have heard the
Until
scream
next time,
and
sleep
come
well.
running down.
The unblinking
He was
eye of a
struggling
camera
with one of
captures
the
everything.
intruders in a
It
desperate,
sees the
clumsy
conspiracy
fight.
in a 15-minute
Through his
glitch,
headset,
the unseen
Alex heard a
audience to our
symphony
private
of
moments,
horror,
and the
grunts,
desperate struggle
the
for
blaring
survival
alarm
in a
siren,
place meant
and
to
the
be safe.
continued, terrified
These stories
screams
remind
of
us
Mrs.
that
Miller.
in a world that is
Alex
always
felt
watching,
like he was
our sense of
suffocating,
security can be a
watching
fragile
a
illusion.
family fight
The real
for their
horror
lives
isn't
from the
always in the
safety of
shadows,
his swivel chair.
but in
He
what's
kept
revealed in
feeding
the cold,
information
hard
to the
light of the
dispatcher.
security feed.
His voice cracking.
Have you ever worked the
there
night
in the
shift
living room,
and seen something you
physical
couldn't explain?
altercation. The
Have you
resident
ever looked at
is
a
fighting.
security camera
Back.
and wondered who
Just
might be
then,
looking back?
one of the intruders
Share
broke
your story
away, raised
in the
his
comments below.
handgun, and pointed it
We read
directly
everyone.
at Mr.
If you
Miller.
enjoy nightmares
Alex's
based
breath
on true
caught
events
in his throat.
and want to hear more,
This was it.
make sure
he was
to like
about
this
to
video
witness a murder.
and subscribe.
In that same instant,
Turn on
a flash
notifications
of red and
so you
blue
never miss a
light
story.
washed over the
Stay safe.
exterior camera.
Stay alert.
The police
And
had
always
arrived.
check your cameras.
The sight of the flash